January 15th, 1919. noon in Boston. In the North End, the most crowded square mile in Boston, tenements shoulder to shoulder with a working waterfront, stands a steel tank 50 feet tall and 90 feet across. Inside it, 2.3 million gallons of molasses. Full, the tank and its cargo weigh on the order of 13,000 tons. In a few seconds, it is going to come apart. All at once. Witnesses will describe what came out of it as a wave. 25 feet high, moving at something like 35 miles an hour. A wave you cannot outrun, made of the slowest substance anyone could imagine. 21 people are about to die in it. The name this disaster carries makes people smile before they learn what it did. Nobody who saw Commercial Street that afternoon smiled about it again. And when the survivors ask why, the company that owns the tank will point away from itself and say, a bomb. The North End, 4 years earlier. Boston's most crowded neighborhood. Tenements, firehouses, freight sidings, a working waterfront. In 1915, the Purity Distilling Company builds a giant tank here, hard against the harbor, because molasses arrives by ship and leaves as industrial alcohol. There is a war on in Europe, and industrial alcohol means munitions. The tank goes up fast. From 1917, the operation belongs to United States Industrial Alcohol, USIA. Here's the detail the whole story turns on. The man who oversaw the tank's construction, Arthur Gell, was the company's treasurer, a finance man. He had no architectural or engineering training, and the court record would later establish that he could not read a blueprint. The one basic safety test for a new tank, filling it with water first and watching where it leaks, was skipped. Water is cheap, and a water test costs only time. It would have drawn a map of every flaw in the shell. The molasses was simply pumped in. When the molasses went in, the tank groaned with every filling, and it leaked. It leaked from the beginning, badly enough that the company painted the tank brown, the color of molasses, so the leaks would be harder to see. Neighborhood children came with cans to collect what seeped out. January 13th, 1919. A ship delivers a fresh load of molasses, warmed so it will flow through the transfer pipes. It goes into the tank on top of the cold winter molasses already there. January 15th. The weather turns. After days of hard cold, the temperature climbs past 40 degrees. At about 12:30, the tank bursts. The wave witnesses describe stands taller than the building's second stories. It throws steel panels of the tank itself against the elevated railway on Atlantic Avenue, buckling the girders and nearly throwing a streetcar from the tracks. It sweeps buildings off their foundations. It kills horses where they stand in the freight yards. When it finally stops, blocks of the North End lie under 2 to 3 feet of molasses. And the neighborhood is coated, streets, walls, and rescuers alike. 21 people die. About 150 are injured. Among the dead is George Lay, a 38-year-old firefighter of the Engine 31 house on the waterfront, which stood directly in the wave's path. Some of the missing are not found for months until the harbor gives them back. Why does a wave of molasses kill people that water might not? In 2016, a team at Harvard modeled the flood, cold corn syrup, poured across a scale model of the 1919 neighborhood, checked against the newspapers, the maps, and the weather records of that week. 2 findings. First, the witnesses were right. The speeds they reported, a wave you could not outrun, were physically credible. Second, and worse, the molasses had been warmed to flow, and Boston in January is cold. As the wave spread through the streets, it cooled fast, and as it cooled, it thickened. The flood that arrived like water set around its victims like tar. People who survived the impact were held where they lay. Rescuers spent hours cutting through a hardening flood. Molasses does not have to drown you. It only has to keep you still. The company already had its answer. The tank, USIA argued, had been destroyed by anarchists, a bomb aimed at a munitions supplier. It was an argument built for its moment, 1919, a country primed to see sabotage. 119 plaintiffs came together against USIA anyway. Dock workers' families, tenement households, the city itself in all but name. It became one of the first proceedings of its kind in Massachusetts. A class action before the phrase was common. An entire neighborhood suing a corporation as one. The court appointed an auditor to find the truth of it, Hugh W. Ogden. He heard testimony for 341 days. The design, the steel, the rivets, the company's record with the tank, weighed against the bomb the company said had destroyed it. In 1925, Ogden reported to the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts. There was no bomb. The tank had failed, structurally, from the way it was designed, built, and run. He assigned full liability to the company. USIA paid about $628,000 in damages, on the order of $7,000 for each of the dead. Nearly a century later, modern engineering closed the file. In 2014, structural engineer Ronald Mayville analysed the tank and found its walls were roughly half as thick as they should have been for its size, even by the standards of 1915. The steel was low in manganese, which made it brittle in the cold. And the cracks began exactly where the court's experts had looked, at the rivet holes. A tank like that does not need a bomb. It only needs a warm day, a fresh load, and time. The disaster changed how American cities build. In its wake came requirements that construction plans be overseen and certified by licensed architects and engineers before anything goes up. The unglamorous paperwork of modern engineering. Every stamped drawing on every construction site descends, in part, from a tank a finance man built and could not understand. It is the same lesson California would relearn 9 years later at a dam called St. Francis. The era of taking a builder's word for it was ending. The tank site is a public park now. Ball fields and bocce courts on the same block of Commercial Street, with the harbour still at its back. Locals said for decades that on warm days the neighbourhood still smelled faintly of molasses. Whether that was memory or molasses, no one ever settled. 21 people, a wave you could not outrun, and a company that pointed at a bomb until an auditor spent 341 days proving the enemy was the tank itself. The record on this one is unusually complete. An auditor's finding, a modern engineer's numbers, and a physics model that vindicated the eyewitnesses a century on. Very few disasters get all three. It wasn't a bomb, it was the building. And everyone who signed off on it knew less about it than the children with the cans.